but someone knows something, yet everyone plays ball. I say we round them all up, let's brain fingerprint them all.
Hello everybody, this is Eric Jose on Making a Murderer on YouTube. I cover the Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey cases, but also as time passes I've been covering other cases such as the Staircase or OJ and many wrongful convictions of youth. I go over the documents, the photos, the videos, anything case related, so stay tuned because I have many more videos just like the one you're about to see. Hello there everybody, how you doing today? We're here today revisiting one of Zellners' experts again. This one is the expert on brain fingerprinting, Dr. Lawrence Farwell. It's really interesting to me. I find the brain fingerprinting stuff pretty interesting. I realize it's not really accepted as a proven technology yet or a technique yet and stuff, but I think that its method, its premise, and the things about it I think are pretty sound, and I think it's got a good chance of detecting whether or not a memory lies within somebody's brain just by reading about it and stuff. So this video is going to go all through the brain fingerprinting so that everybody here can get a better understanding of that. There's a couple links down below for people to check out. But if you watched my last premiere about Dr. Stuart James, you know about the blood spatter on the rear tailgate of the RAV4, because that particular scenario about how Teresa actually died is important in the test that they do on Stephen to test whether or not any memory of how Teresa was murdered lies within his brain. Anyway, so we're going to be that's what this video is going to be about. I'm just revisiting this stuff for those who have just obviously watched MAM2 and have gone looking for more information. This is one of my videos that I had done before, so I want to go ahead and reintroduce it as a premiere so that people can chat alongside it and you know, share their thoughts with each other while they're listening to the information about it. I know there's some people that are kind of derisive and about the brain fingerprinting. I know there's other people that think it may be worthwhile, maybe onto something. So I'll let you guys decide that for yourself, and we'll get on into it. Today we're here to talk about Dr. Lawrence Farwell, PhD, and his brain fingerprinting technology. Quite fascinating stuff. This is not something that just came out yesterday or anything. No. This is 20 years old technology that he's been working on for 20 years, and he's refined it quite a bit. In fact, after Stephen Avery's trial in 2007, he's worked with the CIA, the FBI, and the U.S. Navy at that point, right after Stephen Avery's trial, and he was refining his brain fingerprinting at that point. He invented it in 1996. But shortly after 2007, he was working with those three agencies and some others also, and they were refining the method. And what they were doing is that his original test was really accurate, but there was a slight problem. There was 12.5%. The conclusion was inconclusive, or the results were inconclusive. And so what happened is like I said, after 2007, he started working with these agencies, and they were able to refine the method, and they then were able to knock that 12.5% of people that took the test and came back with inconclusive results. Well, they got that number, that 12.5% number, down quite a bit. And now the test is very solid, and it's this new branch of the testing that he has now created since that point in time. Well, he wasn't able to talk about it or write about it or in any magazines or anything, because it was still being classified as confidential by the government, because that's the agencies he was working with, and so therefore he wasn't able to talk about it until finally in 2012 it was basically made possible for him to go ahead and start talking about it and writing papers about it. So this is the test that he has now done on Stephen Avery. So this is what brain fingerprinting kind of is. We're going to show you. I'm also going to post a video down below, guys, down in the info below. It's a video of basically a reporter who goes in to get brain fingerprinting, and it kind of just goes through the process, so it'll help you guys maybe understand a little bit better about what it is and how it works. So I'm also going to explain it to you here, but if for some reason my explanation leaves you asking a few other questions, that video that I leave in the info may help you out. So, just like with all the other videos with the experts, we're going to start with, why should we be listening to Dr. Lawrence Farwell? What makes Dr. Lawrence Farwell so special, right? Well, here we go. We're going to see his credentials. I am a Harvard-educated forensic neuroscientist and founder of Brain Fingerprinting, LLC. I have published extensively on brain fingerprinting and other scientific topics in the scientific literature and in forensic science, neuroscience, and psychophysiology. I have testified in court as an expert witness on brain fingerprinting. I have conducted research on brain fingerprinting at the FBI, the CIA, and the U.S. Navy. Time magazine named me one of Time's 100. The next wave, the top innovators of this century, who may be the Picassos or Einsteins of the 21st century. A copy of my CV is attached as Exhibit A for this affidavit. I invented brain fingerprinting. Brain fingerprinting is a scientific technology for determining with high accuracy whether or not specific information is stored in a person's brain. Brain fingerprinting has been tested and proven at the FBI, the CIA, and the U.S. Navy, and elsewhere. Brain fingerprinting science has been peer-reviewed and published in leading scientific journals. The technique has a known and a very low error rate. It is applied according to specific scientific standards that have been published in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. The science underlying brain fingerprinting is well accepted in the scientific community. Brain fingerprinting has been applied in criminal cases and has been ruled admissible in court. See Harrington versus State. Okay, so there you see his qualifications, that he essentially invented this technology. It's very well respected in the scientific community. And we're going to get to where we're going to get to some more about what the prosecution will be able to possibly try to refute in this, but they won't be able to try and refute the accuracy and the validity of brain fingerprinting. So we're going to go to the next document here, where he's going to do some more explaining about it. And he's going to talk about how what they're doing is they're testing for, is the information present in the person's brain, or the whoever's coming in to be tested. Is the specific information there in their brain, or is it not present? So that's what this test determines. Information present, or information not present. So I don't know if brain fingerprinting was exactly the right maybe words for it, but whatever it is, it's basically it's not as detailed as a fingerprint. Obviously, it's just information's there, information's not there. So that's basically where we're at. So we'll go into the next document here. He's going to explain a lot of how what the test looks for, what response the test looks for, and why these responses are important and stuff. So we'll move into that right now. Farwell brain fingerprinting is a real-time psychophysiological assessment of a subject's response to stimuli in the form of words or pictures presented on a computer monitor. As a forensic method, the test assesses the subject's knowledge of a crime scene or of the instrumentalities or fruits of a crime, and it can also be used to assess knowledge of the particulars of an alibi scene or sequence of events. In the Homeland Security field, it can be used to detect knowledge of specific training or inside information, knowledge of ISIS terrorist training, or the internal workings and personnel in the particular terrorist cell. Brain fingerprinting uses electroencephalography to measure a specific event-related potential known as the P300, an electrical event beginning 300 milliseconds after exposure to a stimulus. The P300 is characteristic of the information processing that accompanies recognition of stimuli in comparison to a remembered context. I have extended the analysis of this event-related potential further in time to take account of additional information. This extension of the P300 is known as a murmur, memory and encoding related multifaceted electroencephalographic response, or the P300 murmur. Just as a personal computer emits a characteristic sound whenever its central processing unit is transferring information from or to the hard drive or spinning up a optical drive, the human brain emits a characteristic P300 and murmur electrical response whenever the subject responds to a stimulus by updating his memory context to the account of the stimulus. The P300 murmur response is not evoked when the stimulus is irrelevant to the subject's memory context. If the person is a witness or perpetrator of the crime, his response to stimuli that embody accurate details of the crime will evoke a P300 response. These crime or situation relevant words, phrases, or pictures are referred to as probes. Probes are selected such that they contain information that is known only to the perpetrator and investigators and has not been disclosed to the public. Other items known to the person, regardless of whether he was present at the crime, targets, also evoke the response and permit the scientist to establish a baseline from which to compare the person's response to the probes. Other stimuli that have no relevance either to the crime or to anything in the subject's memory, irrelevance, establish a baseline for the flat response, a no P300 evoked, i.e. the response or lack of response to unknown irrelevant information. The signals obtained from the subject's response to multiple presentations of probes, targets, and irrelevant stimuli are averaged using analytical tools that are standard in the field of EEG psychophysiology. In this way, an overall result is obtained demonstrating whether the probes have evoked a P300 recognition response or a flat non-recognition response. A similar test can be administered to probe the subject's alibi defense, however. In the case of an alibi, all that can usually be determined is whether the alibi story has validity in the subject's remembered experience. It is not usually possible to determine whether the exact timing of the alibi experience places the subject away from the crime scene at the time of the crime. In other words, a brain fingerprinting test that shows that the subject's brain contains a record of his alibi and is of value only that it shows that the memory of the events of that time period of the crime is intact. Such a finding does not prove that his alibi is valid or exculpatory. Okay, so there's a bit of explanation into how this whole thing works. Now, what happens is they do an investigation before the subject ever comes in for a brain fingerprinting. They do an investigation, and they find out all the pertinent information, and then they get what they need to recreate it, and or pictures or whatever. And then what they do is they create like a computer program. It's a bunch of images, words being said, words being put on the screen, and things like that. But the right words, the right images, the right things that they're putting on there. Now, they go at this from a kind of a few different points here. They like to find some kind of incident in the person's life where they will definitely have a memory response. They will definitely see it, remember it, and therefore they will issue a P300 response. P300 is that range in the electroencephalogram that they're looking for, that shows that your memory is essentially booting up. Your processor is booting up, and you are like thinking and remembering things. Okay, so it's interesting stuff. So what happens is they create these scenarios. The first scenario is one that they fully expect the subject to know and trigger a P300. Okay, they also put in a irrelevant one. They put in something that has words and objects and images that the subject should not have any kind of recognition of, and therefore there should be no processor boot up, right? So there should only be a non-response, okay? And then they do the actual thing about whatever they're testing for, the crime scene, the act, the murder weapons, whatever. So then they create imagery and wording and like speech for that in the computer program. And then so you understand the process here. They do one that they put one scenario that definitely should elicit a P300. Okay, so that way they know, okay, yes, this person is reacting and giving us a P300 for something that they remember. Then they put in a bunch of stuff that they know the person has no connection to, has no recollection of, and would therefore have no kind of response, and verify that they don't get a P300, right? And then there's also the third scenario. Now, the third scenario is where they're actually looking to see whether or not they get the P300. But they set it up by basically calibrating the test by, the subject definitely will remember and something that the subject definitely won't remember. And that's essentially how they kind of are calibrating the test. So they give them all three, and they do it all at the same time. I don't even think they have a particular order. The person sits down, all three scenarios are put out, and they are measuring the responses at that time. And so then by looking at how the subject responds to these tests, they are able to do an averaging and an analytics, and they have like an algorithm, obviously, that they put this through that kind of sifts through the data and whatever. And this is how they come up with their percentage of whether or not, their realistic percentage of how much this person knows about this particular act or event. Okay, so it also talks about that it can test the validity of a person's remembrance of their alibi, but what it's saying, but the problem is that it's saying is that it's saying is that that person has that memory of that experience of going to that place and doing whatever it is they said they did. That it's only saying that is in their brain, that experience is somewhere in their brain, but they could have been lying. That experience could have happened a day or two before, a day or two after the incident. You don't know. It's just the alibi that they're saying this is where I was and what I was doing, and they can test and see if that memory is actually existing in the person's brain, but they have no way of saying exactly when it happened. So they can't, it's not exculpatory, as they say, in helping a person prove their alibi, because it only proves that the person just remembers those acts and being in that place, but doesn't pin down the exact time of when that person. That's why I was saying about brain fingerprinting it's not as detailed as fingerprinting. It's not. It's highly useful and it's extremely fascinating, but it's not quite as detailed as fingerprinting, because you would think if it was fingerprinting, then they would have some way of tying down exactly the time of that alibi experience, but it's not. It's basically testing. Is the information there? Is the information not there? So, all right, we're going to move into the next document now, where it's essentially going to be talking about the preparation for the test. So here we go. Newly discovered forensic science evidence. Forensic science testing has demonstrated that the perpetrator initially attacked and wounded or killed Teresa Halbach under completely different circumstances and in a different location than anything that was discussed in Mr. Avery's trial. Recently obtained blood spatter evidence has demonstrated definitively that the perpetrator struck Teresa with an object when she was behind her car and the rear cargo door was open. This deposited blood spatter evidence on the inside of the cargo door that could not have been deposited in any other way. As in every crime, the brain of the perpetrator was central to the phenomenon revealed by the newly discovered blood spatter evidence in the Avery case. The perpetrator's feet stood behind the car, and the perpetrator's hands wielded the object that struck Teresa. The perpetrator's feet and hands, however, can operate independently. The perpetrator's brain controlled the actions of his hands and feet. The perpetrator's brain controlled and processed the phenomenon that the perpetrator attacked and struck Teresa when she was behind the car and the cargo door was open. The perpetrator's brain is different from the brain of an innocent suspect. The perpetrator's brain processed the information that Teresa was behind the car, and 2, the cargo door was open when the perpetrator attacked and struck Teresa. An innocent suspect's brain processed entirely different information at the time of the attack. For example, that the innocent suspect was at home doing something else other than murdering Teresa. Having had different experiences and having commanded different actions, the perpetrator's brain is different from the brain of an innocent subject. The purpose of a brain fingerprinting test is to detect this difference between the brain of a perpetrator and the brain of an innocent subject. There are 3 ways that the record of these two facts, that the perpetrator attacked Teresa when she was behind the car and the cargo door was open, could be stored in the suspect's brain. Number one, the suspect is the perpetrator, and he obtained the information when he attacked Teresa. Number two, the suspect is a witness to the crime, and he obtained the information by witnessing, but not perpetrating the crime. And three, the suspect did not perpetrate or witness the crime, but rather obtained this information after the crime, e.g., by seeing it in the news media or hearing of it during the trial or interrogation. Okay, so if you've seen my video about the blood spatter, and I will, by the way, leave that one below in the info as well. If you see my video about that, you know that it's now one of Zellner's experts has recreated the situation of, there was blood on the interior of the cargo door. And he recreated the situation. And it turns out that blood that's on that door is cast off blood from an object, from a hammer. So, anyways, go check out that video if you don't know what I'm talking about. Go ahead and jump down to the info real quick. Go over and watch that video and then come back to this one. So what it's saying is that now with this new evidence that Zellner's expert has come up with about, explaining that blood spatter on the rear interior of the rear cargo door, they now have a new incident that was never talked about at trial, never talked about in the media, never talked about at all. It was never talked about in any way. So that meant they could test Stephen about it, because if Stephen never heard about it on the media, never heard about it from investigators, never heard about it from anybody, he had absolutely no knowledge of it. Okay, Kathleen Zellner discovered this with her experts and didn't tell Stephen about it, obviously, until after the brain fingerprinting. So that's why this can work, and that's why when Stephen is shown that sequence of events and he has no response to it, it tells us somebody else took a hammer to Teresa there at the back of her RAV4. And honestly, if Stephen Avery had a memory of it, trust me, he would have had a P300 response. I mean, especially with a memory like that. I mean, I just can't imagine you could get around creating a P300 response. I can't imagine that when you see something like that you had done, that your brain isn't going to in some way react to it. So, and we're going to move on to later where he gives a percentage of how sure he is that Stephen has no knowledge of the event. So we're going to go ahead and move into the last document now. It's basically the conclusion, and we'll come back one more time. Brain fingerprinting test on Stephen Avery. On May 2nd, 2016, I conducted a brain fingerprinting test on Mr. Avery. This test was structured to determine definitively and scientifically whether or not two specific salient features of the murder of Teresa Halbach were stored in Mr. Avery's brain. Where the victim was in relation to her vehicle when the perpetrator attacked and wounded her. Behind car. The configuration of the victim's vehicle when the perpetrator attacked the victim. The cargo door open. As described above, in brain fingerprinting test involves presenting three types of stimuli consisting of words or phrases on a computer screen and recording the subject's brain responses to these stimuli. Probe stimuli contain information that, one, is known only to the perpetrator and investigators and not to the general public, and hence would not be known by a subject who did not perpetrate or who did not participate in the crime. The subject being tested has never been told or has no way of knowing other than participation in the crime. The subject being tested explicitly denies knowing for any reason. The probe stimuli for my brain fingerprinting test on Mr. Avery were behind the car and cargo door open. I explained to Mr. Avery the significance of these stimuli in relation to the crime, but I did not reveal which were the probe stimuli and which stimuli were irrelevant. Following standard brain fingerprinting subject instructions, I told Mr. Avery that he would see a phrase correctly specifying where the victim was in relation to her vehicle when the perpetrator attacked and wounded her, but he did not inform Mr. Avery that the correct information, probe stimulus, was behind car. I told Mr. Avery that he would see a phrase correctly specifying the configuration of the victim's vehicle when the perpetrator attacked the victim, but I did not inform Mr. Avery the correct information, probe stimulus, was cargo door open. The irrelevant stimuli corresponding to where the victim was in relation to her vehicle when the perpetrator attacked and wounded her were equally plausible, but incorrect. Location, driver's seat, and passenger side. The irrelevant stimuli corresponding to the configuration of the victim's vehicle when the perpetrator attacked, both equally plausible but incorrect in configuration. Front locked up and rear window down. Target stimuli contain crime-relevant information that is known to the suspect. I made sure that Mr. Avery knew the target stimuli and their significance in relation to the crime by informing him of the target phrases and explicitly describing their significance. The target stimuli and their descriptions were as follows. The type of vehicle the victim drove, a Toyota RAV4, and what killed the victim, a .22 bullet. Corresponding irrelevant stimuli for the type of vehicle and the victim drove were a Saab 9.5 and a Volvo S40. The corresponding irrelevant stimuli for what killed the victim were a deep stream and a golf club. For Mr. Avery or anyone else with a basic knowledge of the crime, clearly the target stimuli were correct. Crime-relevant information and the corresponding irrelevant stimuli were irrelevant and had nothing to do with the crime. Prior to the brain fingerprinting test, I gave the following instructions to Mr. Avery. The perpetrator attacked the victim, wounded her, and ultimately killed her. At the trial, one specific attack with one specific weapon was extensively discussed. So, everyone knows about that attack, including you. Just because you know about it does not mean you did it. Only that you heard about it at trial. There was another attack with another method that was not mentioned at trial. The perpetrator knows about that other attack, where it took place, and what happened, but an innocent suspect does not know these things. In this test, you will see items related to more than one attack on a victim in more than one situation and setting. You definitely will know about the one attack that was mentioned in the trial because you heard about it in the trial. This is not a problem. All it means is that you heard about it, the attack in trial, and not, repeat, not that you committed the crime. If you are innocent, you do not know anything about the other attack that took place because you were not there. If you are guilty, you know the details about the other attack because you did it. The brain fingerprinting test will determine whether or not you know specific details about this other attack that was never mentioned at trial and that no one ever told you about. When a subject sees, recognizes, and processes information that is significant in the current context, the brain emits a P300 brainwave response. Clearly, in the current context of the test on information regarding the murder of Teresa Halbach, the target stimuli comprised significant information. Moreover, the target stimuli were significant in context to Mr. Avery because I instructed him to press a specific button in response to targets and another button for all the stimuli. In a brain fingerprinting test, the subject's brain response to targets provide a template for the subject's response to known relevant information. The responses to targets are expected to contain a large P300 brain response. Brain fingerprinting does not make scientific determinations based on visual inspection of a brainwave data. My brain fingerprinting system computes a mathematical determination of information present or information absent based on mathematical analysis of all the brainwave data. If the brain response of the probes matches the brain response of the targets containing a P300, this demonstrates that the tested information is stored in the subject's brain. The determination is information present. If the brain response to the probes matches the brain response to the irrelevance lacking a P300, this demonstrates that the tested information is not stored in the subject's brain. The determination is information absent. The brain fingerprinting system mathematically computes a determination of information present when the subject knows the information embodied in the probes and information absent when the subject does not know the information embodied in the probes. In addition to the brain fingerprinting system computes a statistical confidence for the determination. This computation takes into account the size of the effect measured in the brainwave along with the variability in responses in all of the brainwave data collected. The determination mathematically computed by the brain fingerprinting system in the case of Mr. Avery is as follows. Determination, information absent, statistical confidence, 99.9%. These results mean that scientific testing has determined with a 99.9% statistical confidence that Mr. Avery does not know certain specific details about the attack on Teresa Halbach. This salient, crime-relevant information, which was experienced by the perpetrator when he committed the crime, is not stored in Mr. Avery's brain. Specifically, this information compromises the details that were revealed by a newly discovered blood spatter evidence and embodied in the probe stimuli. This provides scientific evidence that Mr. Avery does not know specific, critical, salient, crime-relevant information regarding what actually took place at the time that the perpetrator attacked Teresa Halbach. For detailed analysis of brain fingerprinting generally and my brain fingerprinting test of Mr. Avery, see my brain fingerprinting report on Mr. Avery attached as Exhibit B to this affidavit. Signed, Lawrence Farwell, Ph.D. All right, folks, so there we see, that's him talking. That's Dr. Farwell talking about administering Stephen's test and what was all involved. So it appears that what they did was they showed him basically an event that looked very similar to what the prosecution said in their case and whatever, and they went ahead and measured his responses to it because it was all, of course, stuff that he was seeing at trial and stuff like that. So, you know, it would have definitely elicited a P300 murmur response so that they could get a definite registering of that. So then they created their three scenarios. They had one with a Volvo S40, one with a Saab S4, I think it was, and then obviously the real scenario with a RAV4. And so they went ahead and did those three scenarios with him. He obviously didn't have any reaction to any of them. He had no reaction to any of them, but he did, obviously, they had buttons on his station for him to say when he recognized like a person, you know, when he saw a person he recognized, or if he saw, or something that, you know, like that. So what they've determined is that because what basically they first of all said that they had to explain the fact that obviously Stephen's going to remember the whole theory that was at trial, and he had to sit through the trial, so he heard all about it. That's also going to be in his memory. But what's coming into play here is the fact that the new blood spatter expert has determined that Teresa Halbach was killed at the back of her RAV4, and that the stains on the inside of the cargo door of the RAV4 are cast-off stains because somebody was doing this, and when they brought it back, it was throwing blood backward onto the interior door, which was wide open. Which was wide open. So they now know that's the case, and they know this was never talked about at trial, not talked about by investigators, because the investigators thought that blood got there because somebody threw Teresa into the RAV4. Like I said, you can check out my video about the blood spatter expert. It goes over all of that. So there is no way that Stephen could have possibly had any knowledge of this situation when Zellner set up the brain fingerprinting after she found out about, you know, after her blood spatter expert came back and told her what that spatter was. And so now we have a situation that Stephen would have no knowledge of because it was never talked about, wouldn't have been in the media, it wouldn't have been anywhere. The number of people that knew about it were very finite. Okay, so they go ahead and run their P3. They go ahead and run their brain fingerprinting on him, and obviously they get a P300 response from the one that they set up, obviously the one they wanted to get their baseline of registering his P300 for sure, which was the scenario with the RAV4 and the 22 bullet kills her. And then the other ones, he has no response. He doesn't remember nothing about those. It registers a P300 for him in terms of the imagery and the facts pertaining to the incidents in each scenario. So he basically, what it comes down to is Dr. Farwell says the brain fingerprinting machine, after calculating all the algorithms in the different wave readings when it was, you know, measuring Stephen's responses, it has come up to a 99.9% assured, you know, basically assured that Stephen has no knowledge of this event. And it's pretty clear that this is how Teresa died at this point. This is how she was killed. And this technology is respected. This technology is established. So it's going to be interesting because the prosecution's not going to be able to refute whether or not brain fingerprinting is authentic or believable. They're only going to be able to try to attack what they used as probes and what they used as irrelevance, and they're only going to be able to argue that maybe they made some poor decisions in what they chose to use as stimuli. So it's going to be interesting, folks, but I think this brain fingerprinting stuff is pretty fascinating. It's pretty interesting, and I think it tells me that Stephen has no knowledge of what happened at the back of that RAV4. I feel pretty certain about that because, like I said, you heard him say it in his opening, when he was giving his credentials, that he was voted times 100 as one of the biggest innovators right now in this century. This stuff is for real. And hey, trust me, I guarantee the FBI, CIA, and the Navy and other agencies that ended up working with him on this, they wouldn't have messed with it if it was BS either. So, anyways, very, very fascinating stuff. Like I said, I will leave my blood spatter video in the information below. I will leave another video, another YouTube video that is basically of a reporter going to get a brain fingerprinting done, and she basically goes through the process, and you get a fairly complete explanation of how it works, what they're doing, what they're looking for, how it kind of, a better, you get to see it all, the equipment and stuff like that. So anyways, if you want to, go ahead and check it out. It gives you a better idea of what brain fingerprinting is. Alrighty, so there we go, everybody. That's the explanation of what brain fingerprinting is from Dr. Lawrence Farwell, one of Zellners' experts. You know that Steve took part in the brain fingerprinting in testing him with the now new scenario for Teresa's death, which I think is important. So that's why I thought it was important to do this one after the Stuart James affidavit, because this one kind of, with the test that they do on Stephen, kind of directly relies upon Stuart James's affidavit. So hope you guys liked it. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.